Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about Magic, Commander, and anything else while I try and drag this whole mental health thing back out of the gutter. Now, today I do want to touch on secret lairs, but not necessarily any secret lairs that might be available right now. When secret lairs first came out, I was very hesitant about what they were and the whole Universes Beyond thing. And I'm just not a fan of how they're doing them now. The way it used to be done, where it was, you'd have to wait a little bit to get your product, that was fine. You kind of knew what you were getting yourself into, but now, with it only being, they only print a certain amount, I'm sure I'm not the only one that hasn't bought any secret lairs since they started doing that. And I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm guessing there's a lot of people like me that are just frustrated because they can't sit in a queue to try and get something. The Marvel secret lairs sold out so fast. And you can't tell me there aren't a ton of people that just did not get them who are now going to have to try and find that stuff on the secondary market that's going to cost them hundreds of dollars more than it should have. So I am just not a fan of how they're doing that now. And moreover, to kind of piggyback off of that, when The Walking Dead secret lair was first announced, I was worried about them making out-of-universe cards that were just going to upset the market, and that did happen with The Walking Dead. Eventually, they decided to make in-universe references to those cards, but it kind of started with the Lord of the Rings set. And don't get me wrong, the Lord of the Rings set is amazing. I did love it. But it was kind of the first sign that, hey, this stuff isn't going away. And the new model of, well, just look at next year. There's going to be a standard set that is Final Fantasy. Do I love the Final Fantasy series? Absolutely. Am I super stoked about having Final Fantasy and Spider-Man be standard legal? Not necessarily. That said, I haven't played standard since 2017, so it's really none of my business, and I'm just gonna keep it that way. Anywho, that was my little mini rant because your boy's just frustrated. And we'll come back in a moment and we'll talk about something else while I go figure that out. Anywho, I'll be right back. And we're back. Now, it's no secret that I am a brewer. I like to build decks, play them a few times, disassemble them, put them back together in a different orientation until I find something that works. And I kind of did that with this guy. So I had pulled the Jolly Balloon Man out of a prize pack from when me and my cousin went to the Duskmourn pre-release. And I looked at this and I said, that's kind of cool. It's a little different from basically any other Boros deck that I'm running. And I decided to put it together, just kind of with what I had laying around. And I will preface this by saying this is in no ways a super tuned deck. But let's just start with the Balloon Man himself. He is a 1/4 human clown for 1, a red and a white. He has haste. And you can pay 1, tap him to create a token that's a copy of another creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other colors and types. It has flying and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. So, there was one thing when I first started putting this together that I was like, oh, I don't necessarily want a ton of legendary creatures in this deck. That said, I did end up with a few. Mostly things that just help with what we're trying to do. Like, Duke Alder Ravenguard is 4, a red and a white for a 5/5 human noble soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another creature you control gains haste and myriad until end of turn. And I thought, well, if we're putting things in here that the Balloon Man wants to make copies of, would we not want to make more copies of them? And the answer to that was yes. In addition to that, another one that's quickly kind of become the hidden commander in the deck is Arabella Abandoned Doll. It's a red and a white for a 1/3 toy. When she attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. There happens to be a lot of those in this deck. In addition to those two, we have Adriana, Captain of the Guard. 3, a red and a white for a 4/4 human knight with melee. Other creatures you control have melee, so this is helping pump those 1/1 tokens to, well, essentially 4/4s. And I want to say there was one more? Yes. Rosie Cotton of South Lane is 2 and a white for a 1/1 halfling peasant. When she enters the battlefield, create a food token. Don't really care too much about that. But whenever you create a token, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. So, a lot of times what we're doing with this is we will make a copy of something we want to stick around. So, to keep that growing so it's harder to deal with, we'll start dumping counters onto the original. And yeah, I guess if you really wanted to hit for 2 instead of for 1 whenever you make the token, you can just put the counter on that. But yeah, for the most part, when I was putting this deck together, I was looking at, hey, what do I have that mostly has like ETB effects? And the first thing I kind of fell on was, well, Boros is really good at getting lands out. And by that I mean white is good at getting lands out, particularly when you're behind. And so the deck list kind of started there with, Knight of the White Orchid, which is white for a 2/2 human knight with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you can search the library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. And then we have almost every version of that. We've got the newest one is Claim Jumper, 2 and a white for a 3/3 rabbit mercenary with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you can search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then, if an opponent controls more lands than you, repeat this process once. If you do search your library this way, shuffle. So, this one really helps you get back if you're stumbling on lands, because as long as, an opponent has 2 more lands than you, or 2 opponents have more lands than you staggered, so one has 1, one has 2, this gets to trigger a couple of times. And those ones are great, but the best one of these we have is actually just Core Cartographer. 3 and a white for a 2/2 Core Soldier. Core Scout. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a Plains card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. This one does not care if an opponent has more lands than you, and this is arguably one of the best cards in the deck, even though it's just a stupid 4-mana common. But regardless, other things I was looking for was backup abilities. So things like Death Greeter's Champion, 2 and a white for a 2/1 human warrior. It has dash for 3 and a red, so if you wanted to continually get the backup ability, you could do it that way. This says backup 1, so when it enters, you put a plus counter on a creature, and then it gets their abilities, which is double strike in this case. We can just constantly make a copy of it. So, yeah. But we have other ETBs like Guarded Air is 5 and a white for a 1/1 human noble with lifelink, but when it enters, you make 2 3/3 white knight creature tokens, so that can help us go wide. We've got Basilica Shepherd, which does much the same, but it's 3 white for a 3/3 Phyrexian Angel with flying. When it enters, you make 2 1/1 colorless Phyrexian My Artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. And then we have some of what I'm just calling the utility creatures in this deck. Things like Combat Celebrant, which is 2 and a red for a 4/1 human warrior. If Combat Celebrant hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control. Then after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So this basically says as long as you have this in your commander and an extra mana, you can continually take extra turns for the amount of mana you have. And this does go infinite with the commander, him, and one other card. It's the only mana dork in the deck, but that's Oasis Gardener. I only put it in because it also has an ETB. So it's 3 mana for a 2/2 Scarecrow. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. And then it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So, yeah. There's, that, I guess. But for the most part, we're just trying to not even flicker that much, but just make copies of things that are gonna enter and do a thing. Like Charming Prince, 1 and a white, 2/2 human noble. When it enters the battlefield, you either scry 2, gain 3 life, or flicker a thing. Restoration Angel, 3 and a white. It's a 3/4 angel with flash flying. When it enters the battlefield, flicker a non-angel. We're just doing the stuff. Now, the rest of our deck is arguably not a lot of things. We're only running 5 instants, and for the most part, for every part, it's just removal. It's Boros Charm, Bovine Intervention, Generous Gift, Swords to Plowshares, and Settle the Wreckage. So we have targeted removal, targeted removal, targeted removal, a protection/damage spell, and then like a massive exile all creature spell. As far as enchantments go, there's only 2. The first one is Smothering Tithe, 3 and a white enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they can pay 2. If they don't, I make a treasure. This is really just in there to get me mana in the early game. And then Legion Loyalty, 6 white for an enchantment. Creatures you control have Myriad. That gets wonky when you have like 12 ETB effects on the board, but it's what the deck is trying to do. Now, when we get to artifacts, there's kind of 2, technically 3 classes of artifacts. The first one is the couple of mana rocks we have, the basics, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Boros Signet. Then there's a few protection spells with like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. But then like our best card draw is in there with Skull Clamp. You just continually clamp whatever 1/1s you make. Then there's the, hey, let's do it again. So, starting off with Battle Mage's Bracers. 2 and a red for an equipment. Equipped creature has haste. We don't necessarily care about that. But whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 1. If you do, copy the ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. It equips for 2. So what's better than 1 copy? Let's make 2 for 1 additional mana. In that same vein, we have Strionic Resonator, 2 mana artifact. You can pay to tap it to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And that's really in there to double up on ETB effects. Then we have the Thousand Year Elixir, 3 mana artifact. You can activate abilities of creatures you control as those creatures have haste. That's great for like the mana dork we were talking about. But more importantly, you can pay 1, tap this to untap a creature. So this is another way we can double up on our activations. This one costs us, 3 mana because we pay 1 to tap him, then pay 1 to untap him, then pay 1 to tap him. Then there's Magerite Stone, 2 mana artifact, pay 1, tap, untap target creature that has an activated ability with tap in its cost. This is also one that's going to cost us 3 to activate, because 1 to activate, 1 to untap, 1 to activate. Then there's Rings of Brighthearth, 3 mana artifact. Whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do, copy the ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this makes it, cost 3 to activate. And then there's the worst option, which is Umbral Mantle, which is a 3 mana equipment. Equipped creature has pay 3 and untap. This creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn, and it equips for 0. So this one makes it cost 5 to activate twice, because you pay 1, tap it, make a copy, pay 3 to untap it, and then pay another 1 to tap it again. So I don't have any infinite mana ways to generate in this deck, so yeah. Now another thing I do want to touch on right before I close out here, those cards that can go get planes, none of them say basic planes. So again, this was just what I had laying around. I did throw a Sacred Foundry in here. So that's the shock land. I have an Elegant Parlor, which was the Surveil land. And I have the Alpine Meadow, which is the snow land. I wasn't able to find, I believe it's called Sacred Peaks, which is just the tapped dual land from the Dominaria United? Dominaria, is it United? I don't know. Anyway, that's the only one I'm missing. And I played this deck at Friday Night Magic before I decided to put those in. And the only reason I really lost was because the guy playing Tuvasa infinited his way into everything. And I was actually really happy with the way that the deck played. I believe I ended up with like 17 lands in play by like turn, I want to say it was 7 or 8. Yeah. Anyway, it's a really fun deck. I do have this deck list up on my Moxfield, and if you want to check it out, it is there. But that said, I think I'm done, and I'm going to go try and clear out my sinuses, because for some reason I woke up this morning and they have decided that I am their number one enemy. So, bye-bye, and I will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulvey of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending, along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.